Chapter 321. Sorry, everyone. Today's update will be delayed and will be posted at 9 p.m. My apologies. I spent the whole day running errands and buying snacks and milk powder for my cat, and I ran out of time. I'll be pushing the update back an hour to 9 p.m. Xiaodi has already completed about 80% of the chapter, but it still needs polishing and a thorough typo check. Sorry for the inconvenience. Chapter 322. The Storms of the Castle. The Daily Life of Diagon Alley. Everything seemed to obey one rule: compromise. Whether it was a clash of ideas, a struggle over interests, or merely a quarrel in behavior, unless life itself was at stake, compromise was the only way out. The same held true in the magical world. Faced with the unexpected appearance of a fourth champion, Madame Maxime and Karkaroff chose to compromise and accept. By the end, the three heads of school even exchanged a look that suggested mutual suspicion. Perhaps each thought the other had known about Ino's strength all along, and staged this to split the contest. Whether it had been a scheme or a genuine accident, both were content with the outcome. In fact, they were relieved. It had been like a student entertainment duel, and then, suddenly, the champion from the last international wizard dueling competition had appeared. There was no fair competition between them. Now, with that champion's legs being held by a teammate and his movement restricted, a match was barely possible. The three heads' decision unified opinion, and by the next day, the castle was full of the news. The gossip swirled like wind, and even a week later, the castle still buzzed with talk of the fourth champion. Harry once again became the center of conversation. No matter what breezes swept the corridors, the depths of the Slytherin common room beneath the castle remained largely calm. Ino paid no attention to the rumors. A lot had happened that week, but what really mattered to him was the date of the first task. After consultation among the 5 judges, it was set for the end of November. Curiously, nearly 2 months after the champions had been chosen, as if to give everyone plenty of time to prepare. Ino had no intention of prying into Dumbledore's plans. What he needed to know, Dumbledore would tell him. What he didn't need to know, he'd only be wasting breath by demanding. If the old headmaster wanted to take the lead, Ino was content to let him. In the Slytherin dormitory, Ino changed out of his plain robe and into the blue long shirt he had knitted from spider silk. A week had passed quietly, and today was the time he had agreed upon with Marcus. Draco hesitated for a long moment before asking at last, "Ino, do you think I should go?" "Ino?" Ino repeated, smiling slightly. "It's your choice. If you want to go, go. If not, stay here and rest. You're a shareholder. Your call." After a beat of thought, Ino answered, "Then I won't go. There's nothing for me to do in there anyway." Draco let out a relieved breath. He was suddenly grateful he hadn't waded too deep into the operations. "Ha! It wasn't as bad as I thought," he muttered. Ino saw through Draco's unease instantly. He wasn't the type to suspect without evidence. To fly off the handle based on Crumb's one-sided story would be foolish. That didn't mean he wouldn't watch. Crumb's words had reminded him of something else. Shared interests can be strong bonds, but they require equality among those who share them. As Ino prepared to leave, far away on Diagon Alley's main street, a shop covering roughly 100 square meters was unusually quiet. The Mirror Shop, originally Malfoy family property and now an investment of Draco's, had 2 floors, the ground floor for business and the second as storage. It might have seemed wasteful, but without a steady stock and variety, stuffing everything on the ground floor wouldn't have worked. The ground floor was open but slow, with fewer items on the shelves than usual. That left the 2 young shop assistants lounging into idle mode, each with a bag of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, chatting while keeping a half-hearted eye on the door. Both looked to be barely 20. The female assistant looked fresh out of Hogwarts. "Penelope, why do you think they're not concentrating on production and are all coming to the shop instead? Did something big happen? Or are they going out of business?" The male assistant asked from behind the counter, half curious, half bored. Penelope turned her head calmly. "I don't know." Then, more pointedly, she added, "Orders from everywhere are scheduled through next year. If your cousin thought this place would go under—" "Stop, stop. I was just saying." Marcus flinched and sobered up. As a neglected branch of the Flint family, he was all too familiar with how the purebloods practiced their hospitality. A smiling face could hide ruthless intent. If that's the case, don't say anything silly. If you really have nothing to do, lie down and sleep. Penelope glanced at the stairs leading to the second floor. She had only spoken casually, and the other boy actually flopped down on the counter and pretended to nap. She felt suddenly helpless. Once a Ravenclaw prefect and president of the Hogwarts Student Council, she had expected at least a respectable job after graduation. Instead, reality had given her a harsh lesson. Muggle-born witches had little place in the ministry, and so-called openness often proved to be a facade. Even a perpetually neglected department like the Centaur Liaison Office was still dominated by half-bloods. If one road closes, you take another, Penelope murmured, watching the worn stairs. Some people belonged upstairs, the rest of them had to stay at their feet. Even the privilege of standing at someone's feet was granted through connections, Percy's in her case. Irony rose in her chest. All the pomp of the castle, the prefect's badge, the council's prestige, felt absurd now. Those she had once looked down on were suddenly in places of respect. She, who had been student council president, was reduced to a shop assistant. Her wage was fair enough, but at the end of the day, she was still just serving. While Penelope kept exclaiming downstairs, the atmosphere on the shop's second floor was quietly strained. The 100-square-meter room, once a cluttered storeroom, had been cleared and set up neatly. A table nearly 20 feet long stood in the center, with 12 high-backed chairs arranged around it. If a Hogwarts professor had peered in, they might have recognized many of the faces. Former famous castle students now gathered as shareholders: Marcus Flint, Mina Burke, even Percy Weasley with his untidy red hair. All of them had a hand in running the film mirror. I feel like this came out of nowhere. Does anyone know why we were called? Marcus said as he sat, his gaze sweeping the table. He tried to make it sound light, but something cold flickered through his eyes. The effect was the sort that intimidated younger wizards. None of the 11 others answered. When silence started to stretch, Mina Burke, the ex-Slytherin prefect, eased the tension. Don't ask for details. If you know, you know. If not, go ask Malfoy. He'll tell you everything. I asked, but he wouldn't say. Marcus shot back with a half-laugh. Percy, sitting nearby, watched the exchange with quiet amusement. Marcus and Mina, one handling Diagon Alley matters, the other Nocturne Alley, were probing, but everyone else kept their silence. Minutes passed in that awkward hush. Then a faint chill threaded the room. A blue halo flashed, and a figure materialized with the soft crackle of flu. A familiar voice filled the space. Sorry to have kept you waiting. Eno Swinburne smiled at the gathered faces and nodded. The smile, however, achieved more than politeness. At the sight of a blue phoenix, everyone in the room instinctively bowed their heads. The brief, brilliant presence of Fide had the same effect as facing a curse. Visceral, unnerving. Oh, sorry, I forgot about Fide's entrance, Eno said, a little embarrassed. There's no other way, though. As you know, the dormitory fireplaces at school aren't linked to the Flu network. He spoke slowly, sincerely. Watching the 12 shareholders keep their heads bowed, his eyes softened. The display had worked exactly as he intended. He the benign host, Fide the formidable enforcer. Reputation only goes so far in the pure-blood world. Sometimes strength speaks louder. With the point made and not wanting to overdo it, Eno reached out and stroked the phoenix's plumage. Fide, go play with the little ones. You've frightened my friends enough. The blue light winked out, and the phoenix was gone. The residual chill remained, but the crushing dread had passed. Fide's dramatic. Chocolate always helps, Eno said. He produced a box of liqueur chocolates from his pocket. When he set it on the table, the chocolates multiplied into a large tray, and the plate slid toward everyone. Thank you, Mr. Swinburne. This is the best chocolate I've ever had, Marcus said, unwrapping one and popping it into his mouth without a second thought about rules against sampling unknown food. Once he started, the others followed. As in the stories, chocolate eased nerves. The room relaxed in a matter of minutes. Thank you, Eno replied lightly, sitting down. There are 2 items on today's agenda. First, the Bulgarian seeker, Victor Krum. He had promised to give Krum a clear answer, and now he intended to keep that promise. Krum approached me. What do you all think? Marcus bristled. That's not true. Please believe me, we didn't receive any letter. For Durmstrang, their headmaster Karkaroff has always handled things himself. He sounded defensive, and in his haste his eyes slipped into we, which drew frowns around the table. Percy's expression hardened. He had come to protect Weasley interests, not to absorb someone else's responsibility. I'm sorry to interrupt, Percy said, but I don't deal with that. Letters and outside sales are all handled by Mr. Flint. His words echoed around the table. Everyone present, aside from Mina, nodded. Marcus's face reddened. He got up, walked to a storage cabinet in the corner, and returned with a neat pile of correspondence and a thick ledger. He set them on the table with a small, rueful smile. These are all the letters exchanged with Karkaroff, he said. This ledger contains the post-World Cup sales records, pre-sale deposits, orders, quantities. Everything is recorded. Veritaserum? Someone muttered defiantly. Marcus's tone held a note of betrayal. Eno's expression tightened. He knew that forcing someone to drink Veritaserum would ruin trust and business relationships. Old Flint and Newt's reputations were at stake. More to the point, his instinct told him Marcus wasn't lying. The Flint family had always been shrewd enough to survive. Let's not bring Veritaserum into this, Eno said calmly. We're all colleagues. As for Crumb, it seems the problem originated with Durmstrang, not with us. Marcus looked relieved. Thank you for trusting me. No, your records proved it, Eno corrected, pointing at the ledger and letters. Marcus gave an awkward smile and said nothing more. All right, the second item, the Triwizard Tournament. Eno tapped the table lightly. This is an opportunity. We can release a special commemorative edition, but it will be difficult. First, we need to deal with two very influential departmental heads. Eno spoke like someone who had watched the tournament and seen wasted potential. The later tasks, hiding underwater, getting lost in a maze, felt too closed off to the spectators. Now was a chance to make the competition more spectacular. At the very least, Eno thought, they should drop the underwater task. Chapter 324, Felix Felicis and the Ravenclaw Diadem. Shakespeare once wrote, "He who abandons time, time also abandons him." Eno never agreed with that. No matter how carefully one treasures time, time can still slip away without a sound. It had been a month and a half since that last meeting in Diagon Alley. Mid-November was here, and the first task of the Triwizard Tournament was less than 2 weeks away. Hogwarts trembled with a spreading restlessness that grew more obvious by the day. In the Slytherin dormitory, Eno leaned against his headboard, a soft quilt folded behind him, and the gentle crackle of the fireplace filling the room. Everything looked strikingly beautiful in that warm glow. Lately, he had cut down on unnecessary outings. Apart from classes, he no longer went to the library. Most of his free time was spent in the dormitory. At first, that was enough. Despite the building tension among the students, the other three champions drew much of the attention, and things remained relatively stable. But that calm only lasted a month. At the end of October, something happened that pulled Eno back into the world. The Order of Merlin. It was a third-class medal, the white ribbon reserved for contributions to scholarship or culture, but his youth made the award remarkable. Since the 12th century, the order had never been granted to a current Hogwarts student. A third-class medal for someone his age was considered groundbreaking. The combination of being both a Triwizard champion and the youngest recipient of an Order of Merlin created an extraordinary stir. It sounded like honor, but it brought trouble as well. Wherever he went, people stared or shouted encouragement. It was manageable at first, but it wore on him. So Eno chose to stay hidden in his dormitory. His meals were cooked by Blue Lantern or brought back by Draco on the way. He didn't go out, and he wasn't bored. Draco usually brought news, and the two-way mirror meant he could make instant calls. Whenever he thought of the mirror, Hermione's face appeared in his mind. He had told her more than once she didn't need to brew so many potions, but Hermione was like a wound-up alarm clock. She went her own way. Every spare moment she had, in addition to classes, she hid in the room of requirement to brew. Perhaps the room of requirement was not the only place Hermione sought refuge. The Slytherin dormitory had its own effect. No sooner had Eno thought of the two-way mirror than his headboard vibrated. A drawer opened and a 3-inch mirror floated out, hovering. The mirror connected and Hermione's surprised voice came from it. Eno, I did it. The brewing time for Felix Felicis has been shortened. Thank you for telling me about that mysterious room. It's brilliant. Hermione chattered on so excitedly she forgot to angle the mirror. Ahem, Hermione, could you tilt the mirror up a foot so I can see your cauldron? Eno said lightly, trying not to sound sharp. Tilt it? Hermione blinked, then looked at the mirror in front of her. When she realized the angle, her face went beet red. Oh no, I have to go. I need to add ingredients. She disconnected in a flurry. The mirror went dark, but what he had heard stayed with him. Hermione sat cross-legged on the dormitory floor, face burning. The girls in her dormitory always told her to show her strengths, but she still felt mortified. She wanted to turn her time turner, but she knew that even if she could undo the moments, she couldn't make someone forget what they'd seen. Eno, however, set aside Hermione's embarrassment and considered the content. Felix Felicis' brewing time shortened. This was huge. He already knew Snape had been giving Hermione private tuition, but even so, her progress in potions surprised him. Felix Felicis is one of the pinnacles of potion making. Reducing its brewing time even by a single day could win major recognition. Among those who had earned Orders of Merlin for potions were names like Damocles Belby, who created the Wolfsbane potion and received an even higher second-class medal. Even Newt Scamander had only gotten a second-class medal for his work on magical creatures. Potions achievements carried significant weight. Thoughts drifted, and then fixation found its path to another object, the Ravenclaw diadem. Earlier, lacking data, Eno had taken the diadem but not studied it thoroughly. Now a thought came. Perhaps Hermione's improvement on Felix Felicis could inspire him. As a powerful tool of alchemy, the diadem and Felix Felicis produced similar effects, the clarity and intuitive leaps that arrive with a streak of luck. Under perfectly calm conditions, a person enters a state of effortless insight. The parallels suggested he might draw inferences from one case to the other. He picked up the two-way mirror again, but he didn't call immediately. He knew Hermione, a reserved girl, would hate being interrupted in the middle of a brew. Better to wait. Tomorrow, he told himself, and set the mirror back into the drawer. Once more, his silhouette blended into the dim dormitory. Sanctuary Valley. Thanks to Blue Lantern's care, everything there flourished. Eno had not come to check the herb harvest, but because he felt a magical pull. He followed it into a garden so impossibly beautiful that it almost felt unreal. Stones gathered by the children of Rohan, branches and leaves bright with color, buds like crystal. The longer he looked, the deeper a quiet joy settled into him. No time for my usual notes today, but I still ask for votes. Votes. Evil laugh. Chapter 325, Colorful River. There was always a colorful river winding through Fairytale Town, separating ideals from reality before converging again in the valley ahead. Amid a sea of bright flowers, Eno hummed softly. It felt almost magical. Even after all this time, the sight of these blossoms brought that memory back. A simple Christmas hat, a pretty glass bottle, or a single piece of candy could keep those children smiling for days. But he worried that the next time he went to Middle-earth, the children of the kingdom of Rohan might already be bowed under the so-called necessities of life. Separating ideals from reality. He sat down and pulled off his boots, planting his bare feet on the soft earth. He'd followed a feeling here, and only now did he notice how the multicolored leaves, like crinkled candy wrappers, shimmered faintly. Crystal buds nestled among the leaves like tiny lenses. From a distance, the little garden looked as if it was spilling light and color. Walking to the center, Eno found a 5-foot-tall tulip, slender and elegant, its petals silk smooth and resonant with texture. At its top, the bud glowed like a living ruby, vibrant and full of life. But it was still only a bud. He wasn't disappointed. A ring bearing the rules of Middle-earth had been given to him, but without corresponding change or growth, it was of limited use. Some things simply had to wait. The more precious, perhaps the longer the wait. Seeing the tulip confirmed that the summons he'd felt had to have come from some other flowers. So he stayed, sitting barefoot in the garden, watching the colors. He lay back on the grass and breathed the sweet floral air. Time seemed to slow. He lost track of how long he'd been there. Then, slowly, a red beam rose from the sea of blooms, followed by orange, yellow, green, blue. More and more colors converged into the crystal buds. When a bud matured, its light shot straight up into the sky. For every flower, there was a beam. The number of branches of light seemed tied to the stones planted among the beds. How many children there might be in Rohan, he couldn't say. From morning until dusk that day, he barely stopped exchanging gifts. By the end, it had even become a sort of self-serve affair. The beams kept climbing until, with the last one, a vast ocean of rainbows met and blended in the valley sky. The irregular band of color slowly lengthened and thinned, and then, impossibly, began to flow, winding and curving like a river. It was a sight that defied the straight-line laws of light. Rainbows should refract and reflect, they shouldn't move like water. Yet there it was, a flowing, twisting, iridescent river suspended above the valley. Eno lay on the soft ground, hands behind his head, utterly captivated. The colorful river in the sky had no obvious function. It didn't have to. Not everything needs immediate utility. Like travel or gazing at a landscape, its purpose could simply be to soften the pace of life, to give the mind a quiet place to rest. From now on, whenever he returned to the valley and looked up, he would find that ribbon of color. Perhaps that would be enough. Time passed. After a while, he sat up, and when the summons feeling had finally faded, he left the garden. He didn't notice a small hand quietly opening the box of books and dolls that Nicholas had placed in the White House in the valley, Hogwarts. In the noisy great hall, after dinner, Draco idly tapped his plate with his cutlery. Each time his original meal disappeared, another untouched plate appeared in its place. This petty ritual was commonplace among the Slytherins, and now the Durmstrang students as well. After a month and a half, the students from the other two European schools had slowly been absorbed into Hogwarts. They had fixed places for meals and lessons. Durmstrang sat in step with Slytherin, while Beauxbaton sat with Ravenclaw. Beauxbaton's choice had infuriated many of the boys in the other houses. After spending time together, they were even more enamored of the charming French girl among them. Every smile, every casual motion of her hair captivated many. Fleur, with her deft social grace, moved effortlessly among the students. It wasn't unusual to see prefects from all four houses clustered around her, boys who watched over her like royal cavalry, loyal and dutiful. Just as Draco lifted his plate to leave, a row broke out at the third long table on the left, the Gryffindor table. "I already said, I don't know. I've told you 100 times." Harry slammed his fist on the wood. A group of Hufflepuffs had walked by and were murmuring again about Cedric's excellence. Unlike the original story, Slytherin wasn't the main provocateur this time. The house barely bothered with Harry. Instead, the Hufflepuffs had become the loudest voice in the room. In truth, it had little to do with houses. Human nature resented inequality. The appearance of a fourth champion had upset the balance. Chapter 326, Control of Human Nature. In the original story, because Cedric was one of the champions, the Hufflepuffs had behaved. Now the situation was reversed. With Eno staying out of it, Slytherin chose to watch from the sidelines, and the burden of confronting Harry fell squarely on Hufflepuff. Even after a month and a half, the little badgers were still sore about it. But Hufflepuff was Hufflepuff, grumbling and sulking, yes, but not crossing the line. There were no brawls, no personal attacks. Still, as the largest house in the castle, they could make a lot of noise. Even if each student only muttered one sentence, the cumulative effect was deafening. Harry felt every one of those mutters. He had had enough of the daily sarcasm. What had once been confined to the corridors now followed him to the Great Hall. He could not even eat in peace. Just as he was about to lose his temper, another voice rang out. "If you're unhappy with the Goblet of Fire's decision, go and argue with Professor Dumbledore. Go to the two heads of department at the Ministry of Magic. Jeering here doesn't prove your courage." Ginny stood up. Though only a third year, she did not hesitate. She planted herself in front of Harry and faced the Hufflepuffs alone. She looked slight, but her presence was in no way diminished. She had the look and tone of a lioness protecting her cub. Seeing Ginny step forward, Hermione did not hesitate either. She stood up beside her. Hermione had few friends in the castle, pitifully few, but Ginny was one of them. Once Ginny and Hermione took a stand, Ron, Neville, Seamus, George, Fred, and more Gryffindors followed. One by one, familiar faces moved to stand with Harry. As the person at the center of it, Harry felt a warmth he had never known before. The past month and a half of coldness and ridicule suddenly seemed small and distant. The anger that had been rising inside him evaporated. Friends were standing beside him, and that made everything different. Seeing those familiar faces, Harry's eyes grew wet. In that moment, he felt a strange, powerful certainty. As long as his friends were there was nothing they couldn't face. Quiet confidence crept up behind him. Sensing something, Ginny turned her head, and their eyes met. In the charged air between them, another kind of feeling flickered into being. On the other side of the great hall, Draco watched the commotion. He didn't join in, and he didn't leave. "Draco, aren't we going over? Maybe they'll start a fight." Crabbe leaned in and asked, his large frame and simple expression making him seem well-suited for the part. "Why would we go?" Draco said, lifting his head to glance at Crabbe. "If you want to go, go by yourself. Eno told me not to get close to Harry." Even though the scene was unfolding right in front of him, Draco observed briefly and then chose to stay away. He picked up his dinner and walked toward the exit without looking back. As his figure disappeared, Crabbe's honest expression briefly clouded. Then a simple, foolish smile returned, and he stood watching the Gryffindor side. Later, back in the Slytherin dormitory, Draco recounted what he'd seen into Malfoy's tape recorder while they ate. "You mean Harry almost got into a fight, and then a whole bunch of Gryffindors voluntarily stood in front of him?" "That's right," Draco said, his voice earnest. "I didn't rush in, but I saw everything. The first to stand up was George and Fred's sister, Ginny, and your Granger was the second." "What do you mean, my Granger? Speak properly," Eno snapped, cutting off the broadcast. The conversation turned into harmless banter, then slid sideways into gossip and teasing. "I am speaking properly," Draco protested, adopting a smug look. "Even though you've been hiding out in the dormitory lately, no one but me knows that you two chat on the two-way mirror every day. You know you can guarantee yourself, but you can't guarantee the other side." Draco rattled on about everything he'd observed. During this break from the quarrels with Harry, he had found a new pastime, eavesdropping on small, secret things and bringing them back to share with Eno. So, now, through the Gryffindor girls, basically the whole castle knows. Many girls don't believe in love anymore, if they think that's what it takes to make you two break up. "Stop," Eno cut in again, staring at the excited Draco with a look that mixed exasperation and amusement. "Honestly, Malfoy would have been a disaster in the newspaper business. If you'd run a magazine, it might still somehow be popular." Sometimes joking sends thoughts spinning in strange directions. At the mention of a magazine, Draco froze for a beat, then his eyes lit up as if struck by an idea. Eno didn't bother with Draco's change of mood. She was happy for the quiet now that he'd stopped talking. But the scene he'd described gave her another thought, one that felt both simple and profound. Maybe she had been overcomplicating Dumbledore's intentions, or maybe there had never been any elaborate plot at all. Either way, the events of today suggested something about Harry's transformation. A boy who had endured nearly 2 months of confrontation and scorn suddenly found a group of friends willing to stand up and shield him at his most helpless. He might lack family, but he had friendship and perhaps love. Harry had missed 2 years of the hardening the original story gave him, and he had been fragile. Yet in the midst of such sorrow and joy, people grow fastest. "Still so wise," Eno murmured to herself. If her guess was right, Dumbledore had calculated human nature from the start. Dumbledore must have known that inequality, not scarcity, would spark controversy. But he also trusted the better parts of people, confident that when Harry was at his most vulnerable, someone would step forward to share his burden. Maybe this wasn't a flawless scheme. Perhaps it was simply a deep understanding of human nature. From every angle, it seemed ingenious. Harry might suffer a little, but no true protagonist in any story is without suffering. In the intricate tapestry of life, a thread of a different color sometimes appears unexpectedly. It is precisely those differently colored threads that make the whole work vibrant and alive. The next morning, after washing up, Eno heard some rather unexpected news. "Are you sure you want to publish a magazine? A Hogwarts monthly?" he asked. "I'm sure. I thought about it all night." Draco nodded earnestly. He had spent the previous evening turning the idea over, and suddenly felt it wasn't a bad plan. Start as a monthly, he said. Collect miscellaneous and odd stories from around the castle, bundle each issue with a film mirror, and include not just print, but recorded film content. Seeing Draco's serious face, Eno fell silent. It wouldn't cost much anyway. At that Diagon Alley meeting, he'd seen Marcus's ledger. If they fulfilled those orders, the dividends alone would give Draco plenty of freedom. If you like it, go for it, Eno said, but you'll have to work on collecting material. If it's boring, the reputation and the sales will suffer. I've thought it through. I'll buy news, Draco replied confidently. Scarhead's lackey, Gryffindor's Colin, Ravenclaw's Carl. He rattled off names until Eno could see he wasn't indulging a passing whim. Last year, Percy and Penelope had come to the castle just to buy a few film mirrors for their graduation portraits. Many people who leave Hogwarts at 17 or 18 never get another chance to set foot inside again. It could be cruel. A magazine, especially one that included film-recorded memories from the two-way mirrors, might let grown-up witches and wizards revisit their youth. The thought warmed Eno, and he told Draco his support. Leave it to me. It'll be a mainstream hit, Draco declared grandly, then changed tack. Oh, right. Eno, want to invest? Just the two of us. All right, I'll put in 500 galleons. The sum was small compared to what it might yield, and Eno wanted to back the idea. Good. I'll write the proposal now. Excited, Draco skipped breakfast and went straight to his desk to begin. Eno smiled and said he'd read it and discuss when Draco had time. While Draco set to work, Eno summoned Corvus. With the flash of a phoenix, the dormitory emptied and quieted. On the 8th floor, a streak of red light slipped down the right corridor, and Eno found himself before the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy being clubbed senseless by trolls. He needed a quiet place to brew potions. After passing the tapestry 3 times, the door he wanted appeared in the stone, the room of requirement. Inside, Hermione knelt by a cauldron, watching a slow, pale smoke curl up from a simmering brew. The scent of Felix Felicis was sharp and unfamiliar at first, but tolerable after a moment. Candlelight made the room intimate. Hermione sat alone, bathed in a soft glow. Her brown hair was tied back casually, her robes plain. She wore thin velvet leggings and a pair of practical khaki ankle boots, unremarkable clothing, but her expression was what caught Eno's eye. Focus and composure beyond her years rested in her face. Every motion she made at the cauldron was careful and exact. Measured spoons, controlled stirs, a small, patient choreography. She hadn't looked up yet. She seemed absorbed in a critical stage of the brew. Eno took a quiet place to the side and waited. After a while, Hermione stopped stirring. She reached for a bag and produced several oddly shaped herbs, holding each up to her nose to sniff as if she were having a silent conversation with them. Satisfied, she dropped them in, one by one, and at last looked up. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "I knew you were here, but I really couldn't be distracted." Her voice filled the roomy space. Eno waved a hand. "I should be the one apologizing. I almost disturbed you." When Hermione assured him she wouldn't be busy for long, Eno moved closer. "You surprised me yesterday. Felix Felicis can actually shorten brewing time? The 6-month process has always been the hardest part." "It's not that it's impossible," Hermione said, smoothing a stray strand of hair from her brow. Concentration had scattered her hair, but it's not entirely my discovery. She looked away, a little embarrassed. Eno noticed and didn't press. It was one thing to continue another wizard's work. Not everyone had the right to claim the same credit. "Can you tell me what happened?" Eno asked. "Of course. I won't listen for free. I can compensate you. I have alchemy knowledge and I could put a puppet to work as an assistant." He took a seat on the floor, thinking of practical exchanges. An alchemical automaton that could help in the lab would be a fair trade, useful for potion work as well, and if the appliance's life and vitality were an issue, he could recall it once a year as an after-sales service. Hermione shook her head quickly at the offer, undoing the neat sweep of hair she had just made. "No, really, you don't need to pay me." She spoke firmly, but without rudeness. The brewing kettle hissed softly, and for a moment both of them watched the potion swirl, a small, shining luck caught in a simmer. Chapter 328, Room of Requests. "There's no need for an exchange. I can decide this myself. When Professor Snape gave me the notes, He said whoever could complete them would earn the honor. Hermione bit her lip, stubborn. Don't be so quick to refuse, Eno said with a smile. But I am curious, how much did you shorten the brewing time for the Felix Felicis? The cost went up by 30%, and the time was cut by a month, just enough to make it in time for the second task. Hermione's answer came before she could think. Eno had expected as much. Brewing Felix Felicis was, for all practical purposes, burning money. As a Muggle-born, Hermione might not fully appreciate the scarcity of some potion ingredients, but Eno did. Still, she went on, softer now. There's still a chance to reduce the cost later, but there's no time to think about that right now. Her voice faded halfway through the sentence and then stopped. She didn't need to finish. Eno could guess the rest. Hermione's nature hadn't changed with the altered plot. Once she decided on something, she would see it through. Hermione, listen to me. You listen to me first, she cut him off. She knew what he was about to say and would not be dissuaded. Eno, you can't treat this lightly. In 1452, during a Triwizard tournament hosted by Beauxbatons, a champion died fighting a horned serpent, and 2 professors were injured. In 1530, when Durmstrang hosted the tournament, she rattled off the Goblet of Fire's history like a schoolbook, really its casualty list. Accidents happened in the tournament roughly every 100 years. Eno, trust me. Even if you don't think you need the Felix Felicis, take it with you. When Hermione looked up, her gaze was steady and uncompromising. How could anyone be heartless in the face of that? Eno had already been able to contact her through the two-way mirror often enough over the past month and a half to see how determined she could be. Maybe his feelings shifted while she waited alone on the astronomy tower, or when she kept pulling little vials of potion from her robes like a nervous hamster. Whatever the moment, his answer was made. All right, I'll take the Felix Felicis. Hermione's face lit up with a joyful smile. Then Eno wondered about Harry. The Golden Trio wasn't as close as in the original timeline, but Hermione's kindness extended beyond their immediate pairing. What about Harry? He asked. Hermione hesitated, a touch of resentment in her voice. He has Professor Snape. I tried to get a ready-made Felix Felicis for him once, but I was told I would have to brew it myself. That's okay, Eno waved it off. Maybe in Snape's eyes, Harry needs that luck more than I do. He wasn't surprised Snape would choose Harry. If the story taught anything, the two who cared most for Harry were probably Snape and Sirius, tragically at odds with each other. Eno didn't mean to meddle beyond a brief question or two. That was enough. For the next while, the mood in the room of requirement was easy and cooperative. Smart people tended to click together. Fools were foolish in their own unique ways. Hermione and Eno were both of the clever sort. When Eno accepted the Felix without argument, it became an unspoken understanding between them. Wait here a moment, he said, glancing at the simmering potion in the cauldron, and vanished. A moment later, he returned with something magnificent in his hands. Ravenclaw's diadem, he announced before Hermione could speak. Oh my goodness, it's real. Hermione's eyes widened. She had assumed the diadem was a legend. Seeing it there, set with a brilliant blue sapphire that caught the candlelight, left her incredulous. It exists. It does, Eno said, handing it to her. But you can only wear it for 15 minutes a week, and only while I'm watching. The diadem's power was unmistakable, and Eno's warning came from experience. Everything exacted a price. A mind accustomed to relying on a magical aid could become dependent. Hermione took the diadem and examined it, the gem throwing multicolored lights across her face. Can I wear it now? She asked. Of course, he nodded. The change was immediate. When she placed the diadem on her head, Hermione seemed to become someone else. Still Hermione in appearance, but her bearing turned noble, cool, almost distant. The effect was uncanny, as if Lady Rowena Ravenclaw herself had designed it for a girl like Hermione. Hermione lifted her hand and stared at her palm as if looking inward, then lowered it slowly and focused on the cauldron. She didn't move, but Eno could see she had slipped into deep contemplation. What surprised him most was how perfectly the diadem fit her. It brought to mind the sorting from the original story, the tug between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor, Hermione had once felt. Some crossroads, once passed, shifted a person's destiny without them noticing. 15 minutes later, Hermione took off the diadem, looking exhausted. Not just tired, her spirit seemed thin and a little unsteady, as though she might faint. Eno stepped forward and steadied her shoulder. 15 minutes is probably still too long for you, he observed. It's all right? Hermione leaned into the support and closed her eyes for a long moment. After a brief rest, she opened them again. Eno, I think I heard Lady Ravenclaw's voice. She sounded unsure and awed at the same time. The room of requirement held its breath with them, the quiet settling back into the hollow space as they both considered what they had seen and what it might mean. Room of requirement. The spacious chamber was dim and mysterious in the candlelight, but what hung heavier in the air was Hermione's revelation. Are you sure? Eno's face had gone grave. You heard Lady Ravenclaw's voice? The idea caught him off guard. Logically, once the diadem had been brought into the sanctuary, any unknown attachments should have faded. Voldemort's remnant soul was proof of that. Hermione's next words eased his worry. I'm not certain it was Lady Ravenclaw, she said. I just heard a voice. It only said one sentence. She sat on the floor, eyes briefly lost in thought before she murmured, Overcoming wisdom is the greatest wealth. That's it? Eno let out a small, relieved laugh. For a moment, he had been bracing for something enormous, a lost Ravenclaw inheritance, an ancient conspiracy. But the message was more like a simple prompt, the startup chime of a Muggle console when you switch it on. He relaxed and then, thinking practically, added, Hermione, 15 minutes is still a bit long. If you want to wear the diadem again to think, don't go over 10 minutes. Hermione gave a faint nod, as if accepting the suggestion. He found it odd that she didn't argue. Something seemed off about the way she'd taken it so quietly. In truth, her mind was nowhere near the diadem. The instant Eno's hand brushed her shoulder, she'd started debating whether she should let herself fall, just like the girls back in the dormitory had suggested, fall into his arms to seize the moment. If she did it, how could she make it look natural, not like she'd planned it? The thought put her in a tangle of indecision. Eno's words faded from her notice. Eno noticed the change. Hermione looked as if enchanted, unfocused eyes, shallow breathing, the candlelight making her appear dazed. Hermione, want me to have Corvus take you back? These potions are safe here anyway. Thorsky offered. The words snapped her back. Potion? Oh, right, the potion. She blinked, then dug a thick notebook from her bag and began to write as ideas poured out. Bat spleen could actually be replaced with lionfish spine powder and flowing fluid grass and peppermint, she wrote feverishly, taking careful notes. Time moved on. In ordinary years, different scenes unfolded, some joyful, some sorrowful. It was late November, the second to last weekend. On Friday, after charms, Harry strode out of the classroom feeling drained. Support from Ginny, Ron, and Hermione had helped after the last incident, and with Cedric's intervention, things had smoothed. The whispering and pointing had lessened. Still, his relief had only invited another burden. With the mental torment gone, came the grind of physical training. He used to look forward to the end of the school day and the weekend. Now he dreaded them because they meant more lessons with Mad-Eye Moody. The image of Moody's scarred face and that wildly spinning magical eye made him uneasy. Harry let out a long sigh as he walked the path outside the castle. He knew Moody was trying to help, and although the methods were harsh, the improvements had been real. He could feel himself getting better. If he had to face Malfoy again, he was confident he could dodge every spell. Moody's hut came into view, a round house built near Hagrid's. Move it. You don't have time to waste. Moody called as he saw Harry hesitating. The shout spurred Harry into quicker, sneakier steps. Dodging, after all, was what Moody emphasized. If the spell can't hit you, it's useless, he remembered Moody saying when they first met. Outside the hut, Moody watched Harry's change in pace and allowed himself a flicker of relief. Come here. No dodging practice today. I'll teach you 2 tricks. Hagrid told you what the first task is, didn't he? Harry glanced across at Hagrid's hut out of habit, but Hagrid wasn't around. Yes, Professor. He said the first task is fighting a dragon. Good, Moody said, nodding, his magical eyes spinning slowly. Since you know it, it'll be easier. He leaned in, tone sharpening. Facing a dragon, dodging isn't enough. You need to learn to hide and stall for time. Harry didn't argue aloud, but inside he bristled. He'd been pushing himself in Moody's brutal training to become stronger, not just to survive on time. The task expected you to confront an enraged dragon and do as much as you could. If all you did was hide for the duration, what would be the point? He imagined the judges' scores and people's contempt. Moody caught the change in expression and didn't scold. The old Auror knew a young man's defiance was a sign of life. It would make the training worthwhile. He let a grin spread across his scarred face, which only made him look more ferocious. Time had slipped by unnoticed, as it always did, and the end of November had arrived. On the morning before the Triwizard Tournament, all the champions were summoned to a special classroom in the castle for a formal inspection. By tradition, the champions' wands had to be checked before the competition. The room was on the second floor. Most of the desks had been pushed to the back to clear a large space at the front. 3 tables draped in red velvet stood side by side at the very front, and behind them were 6 high-backed chairs. Mr. Ollivander, the wand maker, was present. Naturally, it was his place to examine the wands, and 5 officials sat with him, the 3 school heads, Dumbledore among them, and the 2 department heads, Ludo Bagman and Barty Crouch Sr. Bagman, in charge of magical games and sports, looked more like a child on a sugar high than a civil servant. He was practically buzzing with excitement. Harry sat to one side, watching quietly. After the intense special training he'd undergone, he could pick up on subtleties in people's behavior. Swinburne had noticed Harry's guarded stare early on, alert, twitchy, like a second Mad-Eye Moody. He didn't mind. Harry's vigilance was preferable to recklessness. "Champions, time is short. If you please, come up one by one. You'll also need to deal with an interview from the Daily Prophet later," Bagman announced, grinning. "There's no set order," he added with a wink. "If you'd like to draw lots, I can arrange that now." His eyes swept the room and settled on Swinburne. The other 3 champions had seemed odd to him: impassive Crumb, delicate Fleur, and a hyper-alert Harry. Swinburne, by contrast, looked like someone who might as well go first. "All right, since there's no order, I'll go first." Swinburne rose and stepped to the velvet-covered table. He handed his wand to the white-haired Mr. Ollivander. "Long time no see, Mr. Ollivander," he said. "Yes, long time," Ollivander murmured, accepting the wand and holding it up for inspection. "I still remember the story of the elder mother." He peered at the wand, his voice low but audible in the hush of the room. "There's really nothing to check, but they insisted, said it was required by the regulations." He sounded mildly offended at the whole procedure. After a moment's scrutiny, he waved the wand through the air, and to the small audience's amusement, a spray of delicate elderflowers burst from its tip. "Elder wood shaft, phoenix feather core, 12 inches, good flexibility." Mr. Ollivander recited the wand's details as if listing the features of some beloved heirloom. He passed the wand to Bagman, who glanced at it and handed it along to Barty Crouch Sr. What followed, however, was less bureaucratic than sentimental. Karkaroff took the wand with the nervous delicacy of someone holding something fragile and gave it to Madame Maxime. Maxim, whose attention was not on the wand but on the student in front of her, let admiration and a touch of regret show plainly on her face. Swinburne recognized her expression at once. He had declined a rather cozy visit to the Beaubaton carriage not long ago, and it seemed Madame Maxime still bore the faint sting of that refusal. She passed the wand to Dumbledore, who, like a child handed a new toy, immediately produced his own wand. 2 almost identical elderwood wands lay side by side on the table. Same color, same length, even similar knots in the grain. Dumbledore slipped them under the table for a moment, then brought them out with the broad smile of someone about to play a trick. "Come, guess which one is yours," he said, delighted. Swinburne humored him, stroking his chin. "Doesn't look possible to tell from the outside." Dumbledore laughed, triumphant at having stumped the student. The light-hearted exchange elicited a variety of helpless smiles around the room, everyone except Mr. Ollivander, whose expression tightened. For a wand maker, a wizard not recognizing his own wand was a grievous thing. Swinburne didn't spoil the joke. Instead, he said with a smile, "Well, I can't tell, but my wand will show you." No sooner had he spoken than one of the 2 wands began to flower, small white blossoms unfurling along the shaft. The room fell silent for a beat, then relaxed into a ripple of amused and approving murmurs. Bagman stood up briskly. "Mr. Swinburne, please go to the second classroom on the left now. The Daily Prophet will send a reporter to interview you." As Bagman spoke, in the second classroom on the left, Rita Skeeter sat fidgeting. As a special reporter for the Daily Prophet, she had made a career of uncovering secrets, and the more she knew, the more apprehensive she'd become. The ministry, once mired in factional disputes, now seemed bound by an invisible web, an insidious cohesion that, to Rita's experienced eye, was less a knot than a tightening noose. The subtle shifts she'd noticed hinted at consequences far larger than anyone else suspected. Perhaps nothing visible had happened yet. Perhaps the time simply hadn't come. But she felt the change like a chill under her collar. "I hope I can keep up," she murmured into the quiet room, fingers worrying at a stray lock of her golden hair. The thought that the person responsible for these shifting tides would soon sit for her interview made her uneasy and oddly excited at the same time. Chapter 331, Fame and Price. The classroom was empty save for a few stray chairs and the soft scrape of a quill. "Miss Rita, you don't have to be so reserved. Just relax. It's only an interview," someone called cheerfully. Eno watched the reporter who had been such an annoyance in the original story. Rita Skeeter looked nothing like the brazen personality he remembered. Instead, she seemed like a nervous schoolgirl on her first day, all apprehension and fidgeting. "Okay, sir, please have a seat," she managed. After a moment's adjustment, Rita slowly eased. "Is there anything specific I should be aware of for this interview?" she asked, pressing the nib of a quick quotes quill. "Nothing special. Write whatever you like." Eno shook his head slightly. He didn't intend to interfere with anyone's narrative, nor to expose illegal animage or other secrets. A good story shines by nuance, not just black and white. Within reason, he could understand people playing their parts. After all, some shade of gray was essential to any tale. With a soft click, the four champions finished their group photo. Rita's interview wrapped up. They walked out of the classroom together, exchanged a few quick words with the others, and Eno headed straight for the dormitory. He'd been the first to finish and had watched Rita's performance closely, had even seen the skilled writing of the golden medal reporter unfold. He'd seen it all and done nothing to stop it, just as he'd leave Mr. Lovegood and the Quibbler to their eccentricities. The wizarding world needed differing viewpoints, however outrageous. Back in the dormitory, Eno glanced at the alarm on the bedside table. 11:30 a.m. Strange, what had been only a wand check, a photo, and an interview had eaten up 2 hours without him noticing. Even stranger, he hadn't felt tired until he checked the time. The moment he registered it, a faint drowsiness washed over him. He obeyed his body and took a nap. Lying on his bed, he thought about tomorrow. Marcus and the others, using Bagman's connections, had altered the original competition events for spectacle. The dragon in the first task would no longer be a simple grabbing of a golden egg. It would be a head-on timed battle. Changing the event changed the champion's states, especially Harry's. Unlike the way the fake Moody used to be, Harry now carried vigilance in every step, every motion. Eno's thoughts drifted and his eyes closed. The dorm fell into absolute quiet. While Eno slept, the Daily Prophet displayed its usual efficiency. An hour after the interviews ended, a special edition about the Triwizard Tournament hit the presses. The paper was only 2 sheets, 8 pages, but it was as sensational as any of Lockhart's tall tales. The front page carried an enlarged group photo of the champions and Minister Fudge's address, expressing the ministry's hopes for the tournament. That page was innocuous enough. The second page, however, told a different story. Rumors sprawled across it. A Gryffindor boy crying alone in the dark of the dormitory, a charming French girl lingering flirtatiously among boys, a sullen professional seeker suspected of having his brain rattled by a bludger. And Harry, being a British champion with local recognition, got the lion's share. Rita's copy, laconic or fabricated as it pleased, gave him 4 pages of attention out of the remaining 7. The prophet mixed truth and invention so seamlessly that the whole paper arrived at Hogwarts by owl before many had even folded the inked sheets. On the 8th floor, in the Gryffindor common room, Harry set the paper down with a look of burning embarrassment. He couldn't understand it. He had answered everything straightforwardly, so how could Rita turn it into so many leering, long-winded insinuations? He felt, even without looking up, the strange stares of everyone around him. "Mate, don't mind them," Ron said, patting Harry on the shoulder. "Trust me, this is the price of fame. Rita will push things, but she's got standards in her own way." Ron had read the edition not for the scandals, but for Rita's method. Someone, somewhere, had been paying for snippets of gossip. Each little scoop might have been only a couple of nuts, but it showed a way to make money. If there wasn't real news, you could invent it or attribute it to some anonymous Hufflepuff or secret admirer and get away with it. Fabrication had its risks. Last year, someone had been caught inventing a story about Hermione, but under Rita's polished pen, the technique seemed both profitable and easy to dodge. Harry muttered, "I don't want to be famous. I just want to go to school quietly, play Quidditch sometimes. Does anyone ever ask how I feel?" He stared at the glaring headlines and photos as if they burned. The profit was like petrol poured on a small spark. By evening, the whole castle was alight with gossip. Gryffindor threw a raucous feast to celebrate the first task, with Fred and George generously supplying sweets and drinks as if money were no object. Harry smiled politely at the warm wishes, but it was a forced smile. When he found a chance, he slipped out of the common room unnoticed. Seconds later, Ginny stood and walked toward the fat lady's portrait. She raised her wand and drew a single bright line in the air. Flagrate, a spell that traces flaming lines of fire through the air, let wands write shapes or words that burned for a short while before fading. Gryffindor. The common room was noisy as always. Ginny had chased Harry off, and maybe few others noticed, but Hermione had seen everything. A quiet, relieved smile touched her lips. Of her small circle of friends, Hermione knew better than anyone that Ginny's feelings for Harry were genuine. It wasn't just his fame as the so-called chosen one. Maybe that had mattered at first, but as Harry's reputation had waned over the past 2 years, Ginny had not changed. Boys, of course, were hopelessly dense. They rarely guessed what girls were thinking. Seeing Ginny send him away today, Hermione felt truly happy for her. She sat alone on a corner sofa, legs crossed, an open can of butterbeer in hand, and kept glancing toward the common room entrance. The rest of the house was still wrapped up in the evening's warmth. About half an hour later, the fat lady's portrait opened, and, through an entrance just wide enough for 2 abreast, Harry and Ginny came in together. This time they weren't merely walking side by side, their fingers were entwined. Hermione watched and smiled, and a faint sting of envy crept in. "I haven't even held hands yet," she thought. She felt a little regretful, too. She shouldn't have overthought things in the room of requirement back then. If she'd given herself up in the moment, it might not have ended at just holding hands. She pursed her lips and took another small sip of butterbeer. Meanwhile, the Slytherin common room was almost oppressively quiet. Long experience had taught them that Eno was capricious. When he wanted to be lively, he could be the center of attention, telling stories or cracking jokes, even bursting into song when he was in high spirits. But when he withdrew, he could be entirely absent from the house's chatter for a whole day. Tonight felt like the latter. People had gathered because the first task of the Triwizard tournament was tomorrow morning, and it was unlikely they'd see the champion before then, so tonight seemed the last chance to offer their support. Still, after waiting a long time, the corridor to the boys' dormitory remained empty. Slytherins often appeared reserved and private, not as outwardly boisterous as Gryffindor, not as aloof as Ravenclaw, nor as quietly steady as Hufflepuff. But that was only surface. When they felt something deeply, they could be stubborn, even fanatic about it. Everyone wanted to give their blessings, yet no one wanted to be the first to knock. They had sat for nearly an hour without anyone leaving. "Is he not coming? Did someone see him go back to the dorm, or is he asleep?" Daphne asked in a voice so soft it might have been lost, but in the hush it carried to many ears and caused a small stir. "What do you think?" Pansy said with a light chuckle, turning her gaze toward the boys' corridor. "There are people you can always trust, and then there are people you can not only trust but completely entrust yourselves to." She didn't lower her voice or speak in secret. She said it plainly, as if commenting on weather. The words struck a chord in the common room. Every Slytherin present, except for the new first years. Agreed, this was not blind adoration, but trust built on proof. Many had watched Eno make promises and then keep them. Harper Wick was one of those. A half-blood sorted into Slytherin in 1992, he'd risked years of saved pocket money at last year's banquet at Malfoy Manor, investing 2 whole galleons in a venture connected to the new film mirror. His dividends had already tripled his stake. Even with that profit, he had still honored his earlier commitment and sat quietly here for an hour without complaint, and would gladly sit another. Men like Harper were not rare in Slytherin. Even those who hadn't attended the banquet had later chipped in through different channels and received their share of the returns. Pansy's small comment settled the room. She nodded slightly, pleased with how everyone had shown up. Slytherin should be united, not ungrateful. Then faint footsteps came from the boys' corridor. "I'm very sorry, I was held up and didn't expect everyone to be waiting here," Eno called out as he entered. He looked around at the packed common room. Some 2 or 3 girls were even sharing a single armchair. It must have surprised Salazar Slytherin to imagine, if he could, so many young witches and wizards gathering in his common room over 1,000 years later, all at once. Eno raised his right hand slightly. "Thank you all for your support. Glory to Hogwarts." He did not overplay it. His tone was casual, as if mentioning the weather. Still, that calm phrase made many people involuntarily echo him. Glory to Hogwarts. One voice might be soft, but dozens, 100 voices together, even when calm, became a forceful affirmation. Later, in the dormitory, Eno leaned back in his chair and thought about the scene he just left. Watching the way people had responded, he understood a little better how Tom had become Lord Voldemort. A tragic childhood explained part of it, but there was also the change that happens to a young mind at school. A teenager with the emotional maturity of a child, suddenly surrounded by adulation and worship, can become arrogant and conceited. Add to that the loneliness of orphanhood and a twisted temper, and the result becomes almost predictable. Still, that was not Slytherin's fault. If anyone were to be blamed, it would be the person himself. His inability to carry a reputation that exceeded his character. Chapter 333, Vibrant Valley, Professor McGonagall's Instructions. The next morning came early. By the end of November, the temperature in the Scottish Highlands had fallen well below freezing. Despite the cold, the students in the castle were up before dawn. Everyone washed, dressed, and gathered the gear they'd prepared: magically enhanced banners, colorful fireworks, and, of course, Quidditch binoculars. Thanks to the World Cup, over 80% of the students carried Quidditch binoculars. The remainder fell into 2 groups: Muggle-born students who genuinely couldn't afford or find enchanted binoculars, and those who'd brought more expensive equipment like cameras or motion picture devices. Colin was in the latter group. He had both. Last year on the train, he'd filmed Eno non-stop and captured a Dementor from a spectacular angle. A dozen shots from that set had earned him payment and favor with the Daily Prophet. As a familiar face around the castle, Colin now wore several hats: Daily Prophet photographer, motion picture media, and, because Malfoy had commissioned him the day before yesterday, he had another assignment. 3 commissions meant he dashed to the Quidditch pitch without breakfast to claim the best vantage points. He thought he'd arrived early, only to find others had gotten there even earlier. After a quiet look around, he identified them by their equipment and expressions: new rivals. More and more people wanted to be news photographers, and the realization made Colin nervous. Maybe Malfoy's offer required a second thought. At the same time, down in the Slytherin dormitory, Eno took an unusual advantage of castle privileges and had a house elf bring his breakfast up to the common room after washing. Draco paced a bit and kept glancing at the alarm clock. Marcus has already arranged for 12 people. They'll film from different angles. I've put staff on it. The first monthly issue should be out by Christmas. Draco spoke quickly and excitedly, more verbose than usual, almost nagging. Eno understood and rolled up his sleeve, showing an ice blue bracelet around his wrist. Don't worry, I finished it last night. Scores are important, but visuals are what really count. He wiped the corner of his mouth with a napkin. The first battle against the dragon, which might have been ended with a single Sectum Sempra, had actually been planned for a long time. He'd chosen early on not to rely on instant kill spells or anything utterly terrifying. The contest wasn't supposed to be about intimidation. He'd ruled out boggart-induced fear and similar darkness. After much thought, he decided to concentrate on ice and snow magic and transfiguration. That late-night visit to the common room had been part of that planning. A snake-shaped bracelet? An alchemy tool? Draco asked, puzzled. To him, the ice-blue bracelet looked like a piece of art, about 1/3 of an inch thick, its head and tail joined in a beautiful loop. Alchemy tool? Maybe, but I think it's alive. Eno touched the bracelet, feeling the uneven scales beneath his fingers, and the memory of last night's dreamlike experience flooded back. When he decided to use ice, snow, and transfiguration, he'd imagined the sanctuary's earliest anaconda, a vast, 70-foot ice snake fighting a dragon. The scale and spectacle would score highly. He'd even thought to disguise the anaconda so it could enter the arena more easily. But when he entered the sanctuary, he discovered something wholly unexpected. Everything had changed in a dreamlike way. The alchemical puppets Nicholas Flamel had once given him, objects that required no exchange of life to animate, were running around as if set free. The valley's red maples and the 3 oaks had faint faces appearing on their trunks. Even the eyes of the ice and snow anaconda Eno had been transfigured seemed lively. The changes didn't stop there. Every blade of grass, every tree, even the White House and the furniture inside. The tables, chairs, benches, candlesticks, teacups felt on the verge of coming alive. The cause of it all, Eno suspected, was the winding Rainbow River high in the valley's sky. The river wasn't a mere decoration. It was like sunlight, illuminating and warming the place while pouring in an unusual kind of vitality. That vitality didn't follow normal rules. The Rainbow River had its source in stones picked up by Rohan's children, and so its life-giving force was freer and more inclusive, childlike in nature. To that force, anything could be personified. Singing flowers, chatty teacups, fleeing candlesticks, mischievous stools. For now, only Nicholas's puppets were truly active, but Eno was sure the valley would become even more wondrous over time. He realized, too, that the greatest gain from his 10 years in Middle-earth wasn't the tulip associated with the Ring of Fire, it was these unassuming stones. Common and ordinary, they nonetheless contained miracles. He slid his sleeve back down, covering the bracelet that the anaconda had become, and glanced at the alarm clock. I have to go. By now, Professor McGonagall should already be in the Great Hall. He stood and gave Draco a gentle pat on the shoulder. Eno felt a refreshing excitement about the upcoming contest, like a storyteller suddenly finding himself inside a story. Leaving the common room, he greeted passing students with a smile. Everything went smoothly until a corner where several Beauxbatons girls stopped him for an autograph and insisted on a group photo. Harmless interruptions, all of them. In the Great Hall, Professor McGonagall and Harry were already waiting. Thank heavens, I thought you'd overslept. Harry arrived very early, she said. She was her usual composed self, but her habitual tuck of stray hair behind her ear revealed a tension beneath the calm. Sorry, Professor McGonagall, Eno said, inclining his head to Harry as well. Now, don't be nervous, McGonagall said, pushing another loose strand of hair away. I'll be watching the match the whole time. But one thing, do not try to be brave. Her gaze fixed on Harry. As head of Gryffindor, she sensed something different in him today, a drive she could admire under ordinary circumstances. Facing a 5X dragon with that kind of recklessness, however, was worrying. She did not want Gryffindor to produce another Sir Cadogan in 1,000 years. Remember, don't try to be brave. If danger or an accident occurs, give me time to intervene and rescue you. That is my final request. Her voice trembled slightly toward the end, but she enunciated each word clearly. All right, both of you, follow me. The champions enter from the other side. There's one more chapter, but it will be slightly delayed. Xiaodi is still editing. It should be ready around 9 o'clock. Sorry, everyone. Chapter 334, Ice and Fire. Under Professor McGonagall's lead, they bypassed the Quidditch pitch's main entrance and arrived at a secluded side door. You must go in yourselves. Bagman is inside, she said. Outside the door, she gave them a long look. Finally, I wish you good luck. Thank you. Eno nodded seriously, less nervous than Harry, and stepped forward. He walked through a long, narrow passage that allowed only one person at a time, Then the space opened, and he found himself inside a spacious tent. "Ha ha! Our Hogwarts champion is here. Come in quickly. There's less than a quarter of an hour left for preparations." Ludo Bagman stood with a bright smile. He looked middle-aged, but at that moment seemed 10 years younger. "Thank you." Eno answered politely and sat on a nearby bench. He knew the head of department had already been approached by Marcus, but he had no wish to make small talk. Bagman was a judge. Appearing overly familiar would only invite suspicion. Bagman was no fool. Seeing Eno's caution, he turned to the passage again. "Ah, our fourth champion is here too, Harry Potter!" He greeted Harry with equal, if not greater, enthusiasm. Crumb and Fleur exchanged quiet glances, each tucking a worry behind a frown. Harry, for his part, felt an inexplicable irritation at being labeled fourth champion. It made him feel like an extra in the tournament. He suppressed it, nodded once, and sat on the other bench. "All right, now that everyone's here, I'll run through the basic situation, though I imagine you're familiar with it. It's just the way the process works." Bagman chirped on, grinning as if he'd found a galleon. "The hourglass can run for at most half an hour for your safety. Of course, you may give up at any time during that period. As soon as you signal, 10 experienced dragon handlers waiting outside the arena will come in immediately. You have my assurance." As he spoke, Bagman produced a small canvas bag from a cabinet behind him. "Now, we'll draw lots. This determines your order of appearance and which dragon you face." When Bagman lifted the bag, the faces of the 3 other champions went a little pale. That was understandable. None of them were much older than 17, and even the best-trained student would feel unsettled at the thought of facing a 5X dragon. "I'll go first, if you don't mind." Eno rose slowly. He swept his gaze over the other champions. It was an impulse. Going first meant more pressure, but also less uncertainty. Unlike the original egg snatch task, this combat could be dangerous. Whoever went first would set the tone. Bagman didn't mind at all. The order didn't affect his profit, and the other champions, relieved someone had volunteered, nodded. Eno smiled and stepped forward to draw. He plunged his hand into the bag and pulled out a palm-sized miniature dragon token. "Oh ho! A Norwegian Ridgeback!" Bagman announced, then looked back at the champions. "For fairness' sake, I'll ask one last time. Do you accept this draw, or would you like to draw again?" The Norwegian Ridgeback was one of the more dangerous species, similar to a Hungarian horntail, but without the spike at the end of the tail. Bagman knew the question was practically rhetorical. This wasn't a Welsh green, but he maintained the pretense of impartiality. The other 3 champions had clearly done their homework. None objected. "All right, good luck, Mr. Swinburne." Bagman handed other cloth bags to the remaining champions. The order continued to unfold. As if by grim necessity, Harry drew the Hungarian horntail and would go second. Even Bagman showed a flicker of sympathy. "I must go and fulfill my duties as a judge. You will listen for my command and enter the arena in order." With that, he lifted the flap and stepped out. A few minutes later, his voice boomed from outside the tent. "Now, let us welcome our first champion, the champion of Hogwarts, Mr. Eno Swinburne." Amid cheers, Eno walked from the tent. Every eye in the stands turned to him. He smiled and waved to the crowd as he took in the arena. The Norwegian Ridgeback was being held by handlers at one end, chains restricting its flight, and a huge hourglass hung magically in midair above the field. "Champion, prepare!" Bagman's voice called. "Begin!" The dragon was unchained, and the hourglass began to run. Eno flicked his wand and called out, "Winter is coming!" At his command, countless swirling snowflakes burst from the sky, and a cold mist crept along the ground. The ice and snow magic he had inherited from the White Witch unfolded like a living curtain. In an instant, the arena was transformed into a world of frost. Ice and snow spread as far as the eye could see, white dusting the slopes of Hogwarts itself and even the distant tree line of the Forbidden Forest. Perhaps feeling threatened, the Norwegian Ridgeback lunged. Though chained, so its flight was limited, it rose some 30 feet into the air and spewed roaring, scorching flames. Eno didn't flinch. A sharp flick of his wand, without any overt flourish, sent the snowflakes screaming into motion. What had been graceful, decorative snow became an angry blizzard. Flurries whipped into a biting gale that raced toward the dragon's fire. Ice met flame in a clash of elements. For a while, the heat melted the surrounding snow, but the unrelenting torrent of ice and wind overwhelmed the blaze. Slowly, the flames weakened and finally succumbed. The stands erupted in cheers. Eno didn't need to keep pressing. He leveled a small smile and waved again at the crowd, partly showmanship, partly to conserve the magic. He allowed the dragon a moment to tire. If it was terrified into panic, the later spectacle wouldn't be as effective. The battle of ice and fire had been won for now, but the hourglass still ran, and more challenges waited. Chapter 335, The World of Ice and Snow. A dragon rated as a 5X creature by the Ministry of Magic is not something ordinary adult wizards can handle alone. Its thick, hard hide wards off most spells. Its massive body, razor claws and teeth, and searing dragon fire have haunted the nightmares of many. Yet only minutes ago, someone had casually deflected a dragon's attack in front of the teachers and students of Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang. Snow falls, turning the sky into a flurry of white feathers, dressing the world in silver and white. In that pure, hushed scene, Eno walks slowly, his posture so relaxed it looks like he's simply admiring the view. His plain robe, impeccably tailored, is trimmed in Slytherin's luminous green. Against the white landscape, it adds a bright, unexpected flourish. There's something about the way he moves that makes an ordinary standard robe look elegant and flowing, almost like an understated evening gown. From the stands, most of the Slytherin boys stop peering through their telescopes and check their own robes to make sure they've got the same cut. Their expressions flicker with curiosity and envy. In the arena, after Eno had blocked the dragon's fire once, the Norwegian Ridgeback opposite him had become cautious. Eno can't help pressing his lips together. He's been careful, hasn't even attacked, and still the dragon behaves like this. The beast curls onto its side in a defensive pose. A faint disappointment crosses Eno's clear amber eyes. It's a small movement, but everyone in the stands has telescopes, and the solitary boy framed against the snow, delicate features and that tiny hint of letdown, makes all the girls' hearts sink a little. No matter their house or age, they instantly reach the same verdict in their minds. It must be the dragon's fault. Even if a few can tell the dragon is scared, that doesn't matter. They've already decided who's to blame. Stupid dragon. Why can't it just behave? A murmur of disapproval runs through the stands. In the arena below, Eno reads the dragon perfectly. Extreme caution. But once he's convinced it's only wary and not terrified, he relaxes. He strolls to within about 30 feet of the beast and sits down calmly under its watchful gaze. At the same moment, a high-backed chair with armrests rises from the snow. It's carved from pale blue frost, crystal clear like glass. Eno settles into it, chin propped on one hand, and looks at the dragon with no defenses. Snowflakes eddy around him like little sprites, accompanying him as they dance. On the stands, the sight makes Colin uneasy. If every champion performs like this, he thinks his roll of film might not be enough. Then he remembers the moving picture camera in his hand, and with a sudden private grin, decides he won't need the daily profit if pictures are doing all the storytelling. For the first time, he imagines a world where newspapers could be made redundant by images. Muggle or wizard, perhaps it's the same fate. Back in the arena, the dragon remains perfectly still. Eno has already given up any defensive posture and has even gone so far as to make a deliberately provocative show, yet the Ridgeback is unflappable. With that steadiness, even Mad-Eye Moody would probably throw up his hands. The magically suspended hourglass in midair keeps draining. Time slips by, and the snow on the ground thickens. It's a little tedious, but none of the 5 judges, whether in the stands or on the guest platform, seem bored. Dumbledore, in fact, uses the levitation charm to gather a few snowflakes on his table and quietly stacks them into a 5-inch snowman, idly entertaining himself. Eno, finding aggression both uninteresting and unnecessary, decides instead to produce spectacle. With a casual snap of his fingers, a miniature ice castle rises from the wide, snowy ground. It's some 20 feet tall, its footprint matching its height, just about as big as the crouched Ridgeback. Through telescopes, every wizard in the stands can make out towers, the main building, outer walls, covered bridges, and greenhouses. The gates of the main hall swing open, and out march tiny wizards no more than 5 inches tall. Some go in groups, others sweep out on miniature brooms. They draw wands the size of toothpicks and mount an earnest assault. Pea-sized snowballs pepper the dragon's scales, hardly harming it, but the sight is irresistible. Dozens, hundreds of tiny figures attacking a giant, like a scene from Gulliver's Travels. On the main platform, Dumbledore watches the tiny tableau, then glances at the little snowman he's made. With a faint smile, he nudges it aside. Madame Maxime looks at the inferior little snowman that appears next to him and, suppressing a twitch of amusement, turns her head. As she does, she taps her table, and the snowman nudges forward toward Karkaroff. What was meant to be an intense, nerve-wracking Triwizard challenge has almost imperceptibly shifted tone. The arena's mood lightens, cheerful amusement bubbles up. The Norwegian Ridgeback's stubborn stillness has invited playfulness rather than conflict. Eno isn't idle. He keeps conjuring ice figures, letting them enact scenes. The anaconda wrapped around his wrist shifts form into a small, 1-foot-long snake and slithers off to join the fun. The familiar duo from the old moving pictures, the clumsy Tom and the sly Jerry, appear and send the stands into peals of laughter. From the initial thrill to the current warm amusement, only about a quarter of an hour has passed. The enchanted hourglass still has only half its sand run through. The contest is far from over, but for now, the world of ice and snow has become a stage for whimsy rather than a battlefield. Chapter 336, ending with the second warrior. Time always seemed to fly when people laughed. Before half the hourglass had emptied, the arena had been transformed into a fantastical scene. Ice flowers bloomed across the field, 2-foot-tall humping willows swayed, swarms of pixies darted about, puffskeins waddled adorably, and even the puppet wizards that had come out of the castle earlier were now riding brooms, playing a miniature Quidditch match high above the ground. Fairy tales had come to life, a welcome spectacle for an audience unaccustomed to such entertainments. Clang! As the last grains of sand fell, a clear bell rang out across the sky. "The first task is over," Bagman announced, and applause rose from the stands. This time, the clapping was quieter than at the beginning, more sincere than raucous. People genuinely applauded the champion's performance. Many stood instinctively, as if to pay respect to the victor. In the VIP box, as Bagman's voice faded, Eno rose slowly from his high-backed chair, turned and waved to acknowledge the crowd. The moment he turned, the dragon, having feigned timidity, suddenly flared. Its 60-foot body lunged forward. The change was so abrupt that everyone in the arena froze. Spectators, professors in the VIP box, even the dragon handlers at the edge of the field. "Watch out, behind you." Bagman started to shout, then stopped as if the words had been caught in his throat. A 70-foot anaconda, longer than the dragon, had coiled itself tightly around the enraged Norwegian Ridgeback. The snake opened its jaws in a silent, menacing gape. Unlike ordinary snakes, this anaconda's mouth was lined with 4 to 6 rows of hooked teeth. Faced with a maw big enough to swallow an adult and a wall of sharp fangs, the Norwegian Ridgeback bowed its head again in resigned submission. Eno had never taken his eyes off the creature. Though he had seemed casual, he had been watching this unusually spirited dragon all along. Fortunately, it had finally given him what he needed, a dramatic finish to the task and the chance for the anaconda to appear. His earlier preparations had not been wasted. In the arena, Eno smiled and waved his wand. The snowflakes in the air stilled. Behind him, the 2 colossal creatures coiled and strained, one pressing down into the other. In the stands, Colin was busier than ever. With one hand, he steadied his movie camera, its viewfinder rock steady. With the other, he snapped still photos, constantly refocusing. It was a strange, busy choreography, but it captured the moment perfectly. When the task concluded, the dragon handlers went in and led the nearly withdrawn Norwegian Ridgeback away. The ice and snow were cleared. The Triwizard tournament prided itself on absolute fairness. After a few minutes, Bagman stood up in the VIP box and announced loudly, "The judges' scores are in. The champion representing Hogwarts, Mr. Eno Swinburne, has a final score of a perfect 50 points." Cheers and applause swelled again, even more enthusiastic than before. Eno quietly exited the arena amid the ovation. Bagman then announced the second champion. Outside the tent, the 2 paths crossed, and Eno brushed past Harry. "You can do it. Show them Hogwarts courage," Eno called. Harry, slightly nervous, nodded. "Thanks." he said, and walked toward the arena. The Hungarian horntail that awaited him was nearly 65 feet long, its back crowned with ridged spikes like those of the ridgeback. Its tail, however, ended in a thick club studded with sharp bone spikes, like a built-in flail. Although the dragon's movements were currently constrained, its tail still smashed the ground with loud thuds. Each impact made Harry's face grow a little more grim. Moody had taught him certain spells, but faced with that bulk of muscle and scale, Harry could not help wondering whether his magic would barely tickle the beast. In the VIP box, Madame Maxime and Karkaroff exchanged relieved looks. Secretly, they were both grateful to the person who had engineered the extra champion. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been an additional contender, and the scores might have looked very different. Outside the arena, Professor McGonagall gripped her wand nervously, ready to intervene. It wasn't a lack of faith in the dragon handler's skill. She simply didn't trust Harry. A boy under 15, inattentive in class and prone to copying homework, standing before a ferocious Hungarian horntail, this seemed more like sending him to his death than a task. Time moved on. Once Harry entered, Bagman called out, "Champions, prepare! Begin!" The dragon handlers released the horntail's restraints, and the magical hourglass in the sky began to run. The contest restarted its relentless cycle. The young wizards in the stands watched Harry with rapt attention. Although his schoolwork had been unremarkable, the stories and rumors about him had never faded. Many at Hogwarts still treated the boy who lived differently. How long that would last, no one could say, but it was clear the special attention was not about to end. Freed, the horntail reared up and roared. Harry lifted his wand and cast quickly. Vaporize! Protego! The two spells, one disruptive, one defensive, made Professor McGonagall exhale in relief, and even Snape allowed himself a guarded look of approval. When confronted with such an overwhelming opponent, distraction and defense were the wisest first moves. Vaporize, an interference charm, could have unpredictable effects in such a confined space. As Harry's voice faded, wisps of gray mist appeared, curling like smoke. They seemed alive, writhing, gathering, expanding into something like a formless, magical beast. Harry had weighed his options inside the tent, but upon facing the dragon, he had followed Mad-Eye Moody's advice. Use magic to interfere with the dragon's vision and rely on speed and agility to buy time. Any thought of meeting the creature head-on had long since been abandoned. Chapter 337, Shocking Change. The Killing Curse. The Goblet of Fire's arena had been created from the Quidditch pitch. As a Quidditch field, it wasn't especially large, an oval plaza about 800 feet long and 500 feet wide, ringed by towering stands that trapped the air and made it easy for mist to form. Only seconds after Harry released the smoke-conjuring magic, a gray cloud had spread outward, obscuring everything within a radius of several dozen meters. The smoke had expanded quickly at first, then slowed as it lost momentum, but even so it covered more than enough ground for Harry to hide within. Unlike the earlier dragon, the Hungarian horntail had not tested him with bursts of flame this time. Perhaps due to species differences, this dragon chose brute force. With a roar, it beat its enormous wings and lunged straight for the smoke-wreathed area. Inside the haze, Harry darted left and right, rolled and jumped, putting the auror evasion techniques Moody had taught him to full use. Against surging dragonfire, he managed calm, rapid movement, finding tiny openings and sliding through them with desperate, continuous rolls. He was finding positions and then narrowly escaping. What he didn't fully account for was that this was an open competition. The smoke hid him from the dragon, but it also made the show unintelligible for the crowd. The previous task had been a visual feast. Now the stands could only see a cloud of smoke. Spectators grew restless and unhappy. Complaints and muffled disapproval carried on the wind and reached Harry's ears. "Coward," one or two clearly shouted. He wanted to find the voice and make that person come down and face a dragon, but there was no time for that. Inside the champion's tent, Eno had already returned from the arena. He gave Krum and Fleur a nod, sat on the long bench, and smiled to himself. The match had been a success, full of spectacle. The ending with the anaconda and the frost and ice displays would make the Goblet of Fire special edition footage sell well. He wondered whether Marcus would release the highlights separately or only after the 3 tasks were finished. At the back of his mind, he thought of the alchemical puppets back in the valley. They needed more discipline, but for now, he was satisfied. Outside the tent, however, Harry was running low. The hourglass of the task was slipping, his energy drained along with the sand. Continuous high-intensity dodging left him weak. The thin smoke and the taunts from the stands were wearing on him. The laughter and the calls of "coward" cut through to him ruinously. He had trained and practiced so hard to prove himself and live up to the title of Hogwarts champion, and now he felt mocked. The effort that had meant so much suddenly seemed like a joke. When the smoke finally thinned enough 5 minutes later, the dragon unleashed a final torrent of flame, and the mist dispersed completely. Binoculars appeared everywhere as the crowd sought to see what their champion had been doing. Harry stood exposed, hair disheveled, face smudged with dirt, the corner of his standard-issue robe singed black. He looked ridiculous. A ripple of laughter began, small at first, then swelling into a roar. Harry lowered his head and stared at the wand in his hand. He felt foolish, humiliated. The mockery and exhaustion pushed him over the edge. Rage rose up, hot and blinding. The dragon saw the figure it had been tormenting and, stung by some fresh anger of its own, flapped its wings and dove at him faster than before. The handlers rushed in. McGonagall and Snape leveled their wands from the edge of the arena, and the Phoenix Fawkes materialized beside Harry. But the laughter and the fatigue had done their damage. Harry's anger fed on itself until it nearly erased everything else. If it weren't for that dragon, he thought, if it hadn't left him singed and laughed at, none of this would have happened. In a breath, the anger turned into action. "Avada Kedavra!" he shouted. A sudden green light flashed from his wand. For a moment, the whole world seemed to freeze. The beam struck the charging dragon full on. It crashed to the ground, dead. Silence fell like a physical thing. No one had expected it. One of the unforgivable curses had been used, brazenly, openly, and a dragon lay dead at a student's feet. In the stands, faces went white. Draco Malfoy's lips trembled. He was genuinely terrified. He had been careful to keep his distance from Potter this term, and now he felt both frightened and oddly fortunate about that choice. The VIP box erupted. Barty Crouch Sr., former head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and current head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, shot to his feet. "This is a violation of ministry law. An unforgivable curse has been used in public. Harry Potter must be taken into custody. The Triwizard Tournament is suspended." Ludo Bagman rushed to restrain him. "Barty, wait. He's still a student. Even if it was the killing curse, it's impossible he could do that to a dragon intentionally. We can't just pull a champion out and stop the tournament now." "Do as you like later," Crouch snapped. "But I'm taking that student now. The ministry's laws cannot be trampled." Barty tried to argue that the competition couldn't continue without resolving the matter of a champion openly using such a curse. He pleaded for delay, for procedure. Crouch ignored him and turned toward the headmaster's box, waiting for Dumbledore's word. In all of Britain, Dumbledore's opinion still carried the greatest weight. The killing curse, one of the 3 unforgivable curses, outshone the Imperius and Cruciatus in infamy. Its signature green beam brought instant death and a particular kind of horror to anyone who saw it. Many spells, even simple household charms, could kill, but none carried that same ruthless finality and sensory imprint as Avada Kedavra. At the head table, Dumbledore stood motionless, apparently ignoring Barty Crouch Sr.'s questions, his eyes fixed on Harry's figure in the arena. Only when Snape and Professor McGonagall entered the field did his expression loosen a little. Madame Maxime and Karkaroff sensibly kept their silence. This was not their business to meddle in. After a long moment, Dumbledore spoke slowly. "The Goblet of Fire's decision cannot be overturned, Barty. You know that." "Yes, I know," Barty snapped, stung by the weight of Dumbledore's calm. "I know the Goblet's decision is binding, but the public wants an explanation. Too many people saw what happened with the dragon." He glanced around the stands. He didn't know precisely how many had watched, but by evening, or even by the afternoon, the Daily Prophet would be full of it. If the ministry didn't act, the ban on unforgivable curses would be treated like scrap paper, meaningless. "Let's wait until after the first task," he added. Then Harry and I will go to the ministry together, and the matter can be taken to the Wizengamot." Dumbledore's tone stayed light, but his authority made the decision final. "Very well," he said, and Barty, whether to gain time or out of respect, nodded and sat down to resume his role as a judge. After Harry was led away by the two professors, Dumbledore raised his voice with a sonorous charm so it filled the Quidditch pitch. "A small accident occurred. One champion used extreme measures when facing a deadly threat. We will handle this properly, but the competition must go on. We look forward to Miss Delacour and Mr. Crumb's next performances." Words in the wizarding world have power as surely as curses or prophecies, and some people, Dumbledore among them, could make ordinary words perform miracles. Many of the boys in the stands pictured Fleur Delacour. Many others imagined Victor Crum's proud presence from the Quidditch World Cup. A few well-placed sentences, and the panic ebbed. Bagman, a near-professional showman, jumped in to keep the crowd up. "Now, please welcome our third champion." Inside the tent, Fleur heard Bagman and stood up, nerves on edge. She didn't know the details, but Dumbledore's announcement had reached them. Accidents, extreme measures, threats of death, it all sounded dreadful. Crum was used to danger. Quidditch was a risky sport, and he'd surely be all right. Fleur, however, had never faced anything like this. She took a breath, steadied herself, and, after a brief moment of composure, pulled back the tent flap and stepped out. On the other side, Eno rose as well and glanced at Crum. "I'm going to see what's happened. Good luck," he called, then left through the small door he'd entered by. Dumbledore's reassurances had sounded easy, but Eno suspected things weren't so simple. The story being told had already shifted. And which Voldemort were they dealing with now? The paranoid, later incarnation everyone feared, or the cunning, calculating soul that had shared Professor Quirrell's body in Harry's first year? The later Voldemort was terrifying but often unhinged. The earlier one had a mind that reasoned and planned. If it were the latter, that was the kind of threat that worried Eno most. Thinking of the conversations in the corridor that year made him uneasy. With little else on his mind for the tournament, he left the Quidditch pitch and walked toward the hospital wing. Hogwarts, hospital wing. Harry lay on a bed, bewildered and exhausted. He had flashes of anger at the dragon, at the situation, but beyond that, things were hazy. Professor McGonagall watched him with worry, and Snape stood off in a corner, unreadable. Madame Pomfrey had examined him thoroughly. "No major injuries," she said finally. "Nothing obvious. He's simply exhausted. He needs rest, that's all. I'll prepare some restorative potions." "Thank goodness," McGonagall breathed, relief softening her face. "Harry, you heard her. Rest. Don't think about anything. Leave it all to me." She turned to Snape. "You stay and keep an eye on him. I need to perform my duties as deputy headmistress and speak with the judges." With that, she swept from the room, leaving Harry and Snape alone in the big, quiet ward. The silence between them felt awkward. Harry didn't know what to say. Snape, whose mind had been fixed on that last killing curse, wasn't inclined to chatter. The spell had been clean, merciless, instant. Utter confidence behind it, as if the caster expected no resistance. It was a style Snape had seen only once before. Harry, for his part, worried now about something else. His score. What would the judges give him for facing a Hungarian horntail and resorting to such measures? Time slid by quietly. About 15 minutes after McGonagall left, Eno arrived at the hospital wing. He peered in, took in the scene, and then knocked twice on the door. Gently, he pushed it open and stepped inside. Chapter 339, Eno's Backup Plan. The worst-case scenario, Eno pushed into the hospital wing without paying much attention to Harry and walked straight over to Snape. There was no special reason, only that the headmaster looked unsteady at the moment. Snape stood alone in a corner, seemingly calm, but the emptiness and indifference that usually lived in his eyes had been replaced by something more complex. "Professor, are you all right?" The sudden voice startled Snape, but he didn't answer at once. He closed his eyes and stayed like that for a long moment. "I'm fine," he said finally, in his usual level voice. "I forgot to congratulate you on the perfect score." "Heh, it's only a game. No need to fuss," Eno replied with a short laugh, glancing subtly at Harry. After a quick nod, he looked back at Snape. "Some things don't need to be dwelt on. Magic makes miracles. There's always a way." Eno thought of all the kindness Snape had shown him since his first year, whether private potion tutoring or the Half-Blood Prince's annotations, which had helped time and again. Especially Sectum Sempra, those notes still produced impressive results even now. Some debts had to be repaid. After a beat, he added seriously, "Professor, trust me, there's nothing that can't be solved." For a moment, Eno's mind went to the worst-case solution, the one he'd kept back just in case. Kill Harry, then revive him with the ice flower. Yes, the resurrected Harry would be trapped under sanctuary control afterward, but that would be far preferable to being under Voldemort's sway or being assimilated by a lingering fragment of soul. Eno knew the truth as well as anyone. This story was called Harry Potter, and Harry was the protagonist, but that didn't mean reality bent around him. What could a 10-year-old be expected to do on his own? He wasn't born wise. Even at the end of the story, he would only be 17. Yet everyone acted as if the world turned on this half-grown child. Dumbledore wanted to destroy Voldemort while still protecting Harry. Voldemort himself behaved oddly. After resurrection, he seemed obsessed with Harry, missing opportunities for all-out attacks and preferring duels. Snape, predictably, would do whatever saved Harry. Since everything revolved around Harry, Eno's cold logic concluded, when a rope is knotted, cut it. Removing Harry early would solve the root of the problem. Back in the quiet ward, Snape's face softened when Eno said magic could solve anything. It wasn't the words themselves that had power, but they made Snape think of Wolfsbane, the potion that finally solved the werewolf problem for so many witches and wizards. The thought steadied him. "Yes," he muttered, almost to himself. "You're right. Nothing is impossible." Eno said nothing more. He didn't know yet what direction the Goblet of Fire would take. All he could do was take one step at a time. Just then the ward door opened again. "This is the proper way to visit a patient," Madame Pomfrey declared, bustling in with a bottle. "Harry needs rest, not conversation." She saw Eno and Snape standing to one side and smiled with approval. "Drink your medicine, dear. I added a sedative. Get a good night's sleep. Don't think about anything. You're healing." Harry regarded the potion in the glass bottle, a murky, unfamiliar liquid. Under other circumstances, he'd have been disgusted, but now he took it without hesitation and drank. The taste was bitter and sour, like decay, but oddly he wasn't repelled. There was even a flicker of comfort to it. A few minutes later, under the potion's influence, the bed fell silent except for the sound of soft breathing. Watching the sleeping boy, Eno felt a pang. Harry was the titular hero, and everyone acted as if they were doing things for him. Yet he had always been passive, accepted fame, accepted pain from the beginning. If it weren't for that scar, Eno murmured, he wouldn't have to be so famous. He sighed and turned to the window. The humping willow swayed in the winter wind. From the distant Quidditch pitch, he could still hear faint cheers. Then, as if making up his mind, Eno glanced at the lightning-shaped scar on Harry's forehead and stepped away. When he returned, he was holding an old bronze oil lamp. A Horcrux was, after all, a made object, special but created. If an old oil lamp could illuminate and pierce the protections around a time-turner, surely it could do something to a Horcrux. With that reasoning, Eno moved slowly toward the sleeping Harry, Snape watching him with a look of restrained surprise. Half a mile away, the first task of the Triwizard Tournament was ending. Krumm's last evasive move coincided with the hourglass in midair running out. The 5 judges exchanged notes and handed in their scores. Thanks to his seeker reflexes and agility, Krumm's final tally beat Fleur's by 7 points and reached an impressive 45. Cheers and applause filled the stadium as the first task concluded. Without prompting, many of the younger wizards and witches began to file out, eager to talk over what they'd seen. But the real drama in the judges' box was only beginning. "All right," Barty Crouch Sr. announced, standing and loosening his tie. "I will be taking Harry Potter with me." Professor McGonagall stepped forward immediately, her posture hard as iron. "My student needs rest," she said flatly. "He's injured. No one is taking him now." Barty didn't confront her head-on. Instead, he looked to Dumbledore. He wasn't worried Dumbledore would break his promise. He had made it in front of the other 2 headmasters, but he wanted clarification. Ludo Bagman, surprisingly, offered no objection either. Though he didn't control the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, As a senior ministry figure, he couldn't ignore what was happening in public. At the high table, after Professor McGonagall made her position unmistakably clear, Madame Maxime turned and left without hesitation. Whatever quarrel had arisen between Hogwarts and the British Ministry of Magic was not her concern as the headmistress from France. Lingering would only make it look as if she wanted to watch a spectacle. Her departure made Karkaroff's continued presence awkward too. Once those two foreign dignitaries were gone, Bagmen visibly relaxed. Only their own people remained, and everything could be discussed behind closed doors. To Bagmen, it was no great matter. A dragon had been killed, and nobody had died. The only real complication was that an unforgivable curse had been used publicly. But given the danger at the time, and Harry's renown, going to the ministry would be a formality and would not affect the upcoming competition. "Listen," Bagman said, playing mediator. "This isn't as bad as it looks, Barty, so don't get yourself so worked up." With his colleague's smoothing words, Barty agreed to a temporary compromise. "I'll stay here until Harry Potter fully recovers," he said, nodding. McGonagall's glare stopped him. "Stay here? Then you'll have to pitch your own tent. Hogwarts kitchens serve only the castle's teachers and students." Trying to diffuse things, Bagman added cheerfully, "Professor, don't worry. Barty has a house elf, and besides, he might not be used to student food." Instead of taking the hint, Barty looked genuinely startled. "I have a house elf?" He had the look of a man who had said the wrong thing. Realizing his mistake, he moved on. "Never mind. The point is, the matter is settled. I'll wait for Harry to recover." Meanwhile, in the hospital wing, Eno had noticed something strange. Under the bronze oil lamp, Harry's scar was emitting thick black smoke. It looked exactly like the smoke that had risen from Ravenclaw's diadem, except here it was different. The diadem's smoke had carried a tempting, seductive power. The smoke around Harry seemed muted, restrained by something. It was less aggressive, almost subdued. That didn't make it safe. Given how dangerous Horcrux maledictions could be, Eno was uneasy. Harry had been living with that malevolent presence for so long that it was only thanks to his mother's protection that he had not been overwhelmed. Seeing the smoke so apparently checked made Eno think of the sacrificial magic Lily had woven in the original story. Without that protection, he believed, Harry would have succumbed long ago. "But it shouldn't be like this," he murmured. "What did you see?" Severus Snape had appeared at his shoulder. The look on Eno's face made Snape understand at once. His student was not one for idle pranks. Eno answered freely. "I saw the malice Voldemort left behind. Fortunately, it's being restrained, so it shouldn't cause any major harm right now." "And this time?" Snape let the question hang, every syllable asking what had changed. "I don't know." Eno shook his head. He had a nagging sense that he had missed something. With the number of Horcruxes known to have been destroyed, and with Dumbledore having collected the remaining 2 over the summer as an extra precaution, such an extreme manifestation shouldn't have been possible. Snape said nothing more, merely standing and watching the sleeping boy. Harry lay on the hospital bed with his eyes tightly closed. The face beneath the bandage was oddly familiar, with a resemblance that tugged at Snape. Memories flickered unbidden. The first potions lesson 4 years ago, moments from the past. He felt more than a teacher's concern. "Eno, I'm going to leave first," Eno said after a moment. "There are some things I need to do to clear my head." Snape nodded. Then, in his usual clipped tone, he offered, "If you need any Felix Felicis, tell me. I have plenty in reserve." Hearing that, Eno briefly wondered if Hermione had been joking earlier about the potion's scarcity. He considered that it might be one of Snape's tests, or simply something the professor was entitled to decide for himself. "Not for now," he said. "If I need it, I'll come to you." He stepped out of the hospital wing. By the time the competition was over, the castle was a hive of talk. Corridors, dormitories, the great hall, and common rooms were all full of students clustered in groups. No one wanted to be alone with their thoughts. Even in the quietest parts of the school, 2 young witches walked side by side down a corridor outside the hospital wing. "You don't need to worry too much," Hermione told Ginny gently, explaining what an emergency evacuation had entailed. Ginny had been frantic. The moment Harry had killed the dragon and the professors had taken him away, she had wanted to follow. but from the crowded stands, she hadn't been able to reach him. She had raced to the hospital as soon as the competition ended, and Hermione had come with her. "Thank you, Hermione. I know, I know." Ginny turned her head, still anxious but visibly calmer. Hermione said no more. In the end, Harry's use of an unforgivable curse had been witnessed by many, and there was nothing more she could add. As Eno left the hospital, two Gryffindor girls were walking toward him, chatting and humming a tuneless little song. "I finished coding today. La la la," one sang, then giggled. Please vote," they called, and hurried on, already lost in the next conversation.